and welcome to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. I am your host, Mookie Spitz, and I have no hair, but I've got tons of heart. And what I want to share with you today is the oldest trope in the storytelling book. Imagine going back into your own past and giving your younger self some pieces of advice. How would that change your younger self's parallel timeline? Hearing that advice, would you take it? What would you think of this older person coming back claiming to be your future self and giving you some advice? And then what about your older self? If you could go back to where you came from, as it were, would that interaction with your younger self change you and the rest of your life in that timeline? And which timeline is the real timeline? Your younger self with the insights branching off, your older self presumably returning to the timeline you left. All sorts of contradictions and self-annihilating timelines. But that all said, let's just conduct this exercise as a kind of thought experiment, an emotional one at that, and look at it within the context of shedding light on possibilities not behind, but moving forward. Fear and loathing in high school was probably the best way to describe my experiences there, and this one crazy night I'd like to tell you about. If you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self? Would you give good advice to relive your life for the better, or offer dire warnings to avoid your biggest mistakes? Would you share your hopes and dreams, or describe whom you actually came to be? Would both of you be proud or ashamed, excited or afraid, optimistic or fatalistic through this encounter? In lieu of having such a time machine, remembering and sharing stories from our youth is a compelling psychological exercise. Cliched, I know, Back to the Future, but let's give it a whirl. Deep in our past, specific events triggered us and made us who we are today. Reminiscing gives us the opportunity to discover our strategies and coping mechanisms, perhaps explore insights to help make our future self more actualized in ways, or at least more self-reflective. So I got to give my older self points for at least conducting such an exercise. And I like the opportunity to even wonder if that younger self, my younger self, would be freaked out by the whole experience. For early peakers, high school was the high point of their life. You know the type, maybe you are the type, the prom kings and queens, honor students and valedictorians, the debate team champions and varsity athletes. But for slow learners, those teen years totally sucked. The dropouts and delinquents, breakfast clubbers and detention junkies. For most of us falling somewhere in between, we took the good with the bad, tried to figure it all out. Adolescence, the hormones flaring, neither young nor old, at the cusp, the singularity where all things happen. From a social Darwinian point of view, once you've got hair on your balls and you're ovulating, you are fertile. You're technically a grown adult in our pre-civilized society. That's where it all had to happen. Time was running out. Nowadays, we luxuriate in living past 30. So what we make of teens now and the adolescent craziness, I truly think it's hardwired into us. Get out of the cave, take a big shit in the cave on the way out. Make sure you're not welcome back. Go out there and forage and fornicate, breed and then die. I think that's our prerogative from Darwin, who always wins. Lucky we have running water. Things have changed. Maybe a little bit. Anyway, looking back, I see the mirror image of a rambunctious kid having my adult strengths, weaknesses, and quirkiness inchoate but already manifest. I was and still am smart but scatterbrained, intuitive yet self deluded, wise but immature, loud mouthed yet timid. 40 years later, I'm essentially the same person, enduring similar mistakes, enjoying similar successes. Yeah, meet me. That's one of the ironies of looking back and trying to plan ahead. You can go anywhere you want, but you always take yourself with you, is yet another cliche, and cliche because it's so damn true. The essence was always there. That's because the essence never really changed. I remember seeing my own kids for the first time, fresh out, as it were, in the delivery room, and I felt their souls from the moment we laid eyes on each other, and it has not deviated one iota. The older son and the younger son staying in character, as it were. They haven't changed. I haven't changed. I wonder if anyone ever really changes. So then that begs the question of the utility of this exercise, right? Why go back? Why share? It also begs the question of what opportunities do for us. But let's see. Let's find out. Back then, just like now, I had a small but close circle of friends. Ed was big and tall, round-faced and shaggy-haired, bespectacled and introverted. Fran was tall and thin, long-faced and crew-cutted, wide-eyed and extroverted. Ed and I were tight, spent some time together. Fran spontaneously showed up on a whim, his jittery hysteria dipping into our world only to just as abruptly dip out again. Also tall, with strong legs and long arms, I inherited the physique of Michael Phelps, but the eyes of Mr. Magoo. I could have been a contender, as they say, a football, baseball, or swimming champion, if not for my nearly incapacitating myopia, astigmatism, and nystagmus. -9 diopter, folks, and as I get older, worserer and worserer. My eyesight has always been my major handicap to the point of not really seeing faces. So, what some people might interpret as spectrumy kind of behavior, I just literally can't see your facial expressions. So, don't blame me. Being unable to clearly see exacerbated my innate introversion, drove me further inside my defiantly eccentric team head. So I naturally gravitated toward fellow misfits, burnouts, and slackers, just like Fran and Ed. We blew off gym class and smoked joints in the parking garages of shopping malls, wore army jackets and never combed our greasy hair, listened to Joy Division and read William S. Burroughs. We had a bad self-image yet acted superior to everyone else, especially those who were better adjusted. Drugs were central to our identities, false bravado camouflaging our acne-laced pubescent angst. Partying incessantly, we built tolerance to the point our everyday highs got boring. So we boosted the banal like people in LA do with celebrity sightings. No big deal spotting Lady Gaga at the Oscars, but catch her in the plumbing aisle of the Home Depot on Sunset scores you epic points. This got silly to the point sometimes where we would make bets who could be the most wasted in school and not become exposed. I remember taking some heavy drugs and wandering like a zombie to the point of almost causing a stir. And then I would run into Ed or Fran or Dave or anyone in our little clique. And there'd be this little wink, this acknowledgement, maybe even an index finger pointing, twirling around an ear. Are you wasted? Are you as wasted as me? Ha ha ha, we were all in it together. Such logic made getting wasted in the basement of Ed's house on a Tuesday evening cool. But dropping acid for breakfast and tripping through an entire day at school, way cooler. Jocks and geeks flexed by winning sports games and chess tournaments. Burnouts like us declared victory by staying fully functional in everyday situations while being totally blasted on those extremely dangerous drugs. Became kind of a sport, our own burnout sport. That's why I was only mildly interested when Fran and Ed raved about scoring some particularly amazing LSD. My spidey senses started tingling, though, when they also mentioned a car and a Sunday night of hallucinogenic mayhem looming ahead. Not knowing what they had in store increased my thrill immeasurably. I reveled in taking risks with irresponsible risk takers. And that also illustrated the dichotomy of being the shy, timid, essentially cowardly and clueless teenager, and at the same time indulging in the most extreme kinds of activities, as I'll relate in a few minutes in this story. But wrap your head around just teens, kids who really felt like they had nothing to lose. Suburban Chicago spoiled brats, not rich, but comfortable enough to indulge in this kind of luxurious risk-taking and bullshit. That, in a sense, was our identity. Just like crazy drivers drive crazy because it's the only opportunity they have in their otherwise boring lives to take risks or express themselves behind the wheel. We took these kind of risks. I mean, what the hell else were we going to do? How else could we be cool than to be alternative in this kind of way? We were bromancing the stoned, as it were. So that afternoon, Ed rolled up to my house with Fran behind the wheel of his dark green MG Midget. That was, still is, one of those tiny two-seater cars. No back seat. Just kind of a rear dash, as it were. The fall of 1979 was an exciting time, especially if you were 15 years old and had absolutely no idea what was going on. In the backdrop, the U.S. just bailed out Chrysler. I suggested to my father, by the way, that he buy stock, and he scoffed at me while he was watering the lawn. That could have paid for his retirement, and I gloat and smirk in the reminiscence. My father never listened to me, ever. Most of the time I was no doubt full of shit, but I could have bankrolled him at this point. Anyway, the U.S. just bailed out Chrysler, big autos, and Iranians took hundreds of hostages, if you're old enough to remember. And a NORAD false alarm almost triggered World War III. And of course, the more things change. Fran's 75 convertible roadster was that two-seater I just mentioned. and both of those seats were taken. Fran passed the lit joint to Ed, who took a deep drag and passed it to me as I climbed into the tiny crevice between them and the back window. Folding roof plastic buckled as I squeezed my 6'2", 180-pound teen body inside. Before my first toke, Fran jammed the car into gear and we roared off into this waking shared dream, part nightmare, but mostly an infantile journey into wonderland that I still wonder about to this day. Racing through suburbia, I traded the smoldering joint for a bottle of Mickey's malt liquor, our favorite. The wide-mouthed, beehive-shaped green grenades, our favorite way to get plowed. Weeks earlier, I'd snuck a sixer into a midnight double feature of The Who's Kids Are All Right and Frank Zappa's 200 Motels at the Varsity Theater in Evanston, Illinois. Downtown Evanston, the midnight double feature show each and every weekend, slugging them down until projectile vomiting at the first sight of Ringo Starr's Scar. I remember that night, at least up to that point. The seats were sloped like those old school movie theaters. And I remember sneaking into Mickey's in my army jacket, clinking and clanking, seated and slugging them down. And then all of a sudden, I just hurled. And the look on the faces of those in the seats in front of me, clearing out like Moses parting the Red Sea with the horrific sludge of my barf rolling down toward the stage and screen. Not my best moment, but memorable still. We all need to make an impact on life. Like Joey Montana says in House of Cards, I think, that Mammoth movie, take something from life. Go ahead, take it. At least I take this memory by giving something those poor folks really didn't want to receive. Anyway, fully recovered at this point. My latest marijuana and booze binge was in full stride by the time we pulled into a forest preserve, parked the car, and sat at a nondescript bench. Fran doled out the blotter acid like communion wafers, the small paper squares that corrugated edges and surfaces adorned with images of Elvis, Betty Boop, and Richard Nixon. Dosages and quality were never certain. It's hard to describe how exciting this stuff was at the time. The fact that it was so illegal, probably a felony offense. The fact that even the name of it, acid, we were dropping acid. We were 15 years old, tripping balls. So clandestine, so illegal. We could be bad boys. And we were bad boys in this semi-ethical way. All we were doing was breaking the law and maybe zapping brain cells. And as you'll soon see, endangering lives by driving under the influence. But we weren't robbing liquor stores. We weren't stealing cars. In the range of bad boy delinquency from 0 altar boy to 10 gangbanger. I mean, how do you even score us? We were just stupid and reckless, but at the time, nobody was cooler than us. A felony possession, as I'm mentioning, the stuff was likely made in a bathtub, and the actual potency could usually be discerned within about 20 minutes after placing the rough pulp on our tongues. A bum strychnine-laced dose would induce agitation and fill our heads with demons. but a slick, pure acid mix tripped our lights fantastic, hurtling us down the rabbit hole, reality dissolving through the looking glass. This shit was real. The hallucinations, paradoxically, were just as real. Intense, fantastic perception and reality blending. Our brain is chemistry. The interaction between our minds and our bodies and the world around us, fluid, emergent, dependent on each other. All this shit was floating in my head, and I loved it. That sense of leaping outside of oneself, that sense of, well, I'm getting ahead of myself in excitement. We'll soon find out what was in store for Fran and Ed and me. At the time, I knew we'd lucked out with a stellar batch of this stuff when Ed's face erupted in flashing red and blue lights, in sync with the Brian Eno song blasting on his JVC boombox at that picnic table at the little area of the forest preserve in suburban Skokie, Oakton, Gulf, Illinois, due west, I think, of Evanston, in that varsity theater that I had cleared out maybe only a week or two before. We grooved to the synesthesia until screeching tires, wailing squad car sirens, and shouting police erupted all around us. The harsh jolt shook us back into reality and sent us frantically bolting through the trees for our lives. I remember this like yesterday. The feeling of the stuff kicking in, things getting weird. And then you start to have doubts like what's real and what isn't? What's in my head, tweaked by the chemistry of this stuff, and what's objective, external stimuli hitting my ears and tweaking my eyes and ears and mind and body. And wait a second, all of a sudden is getting more real than we anticipated. And then the cops and the sirens and the running. Oh, this was so thrilling. The bizarre effects of lysergic acid diethylamide were first experienced by Albert Hoffman in 1943. The guy was riding his bicycle back home from the Sandoz lab where he was tinkering with this stuff. His physical activity accentuated the space and time distortion, making for one wild ride at the time. Fran, Ed, and I could relate as we fled the cops through the forest preserve, only to somehow wind up full circle back at his car, leaping in. I don't know how much time lapsed. Was it 30 seconds or 10 minutes of running around? And then where did the car come from? And how did we find our way back? And what the hell was going on? And then whoom, 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 whoom. Fran was crazy, but kept his cool while wasted and zoomed us out of there. Similar to Ed and me, he was a hyper-focused underachiever, deeply intense, yet totally lost. A couple years older, but none the wiser, he wore vintage Air Force uniforms that were oddly apropos, given his legit license earned from flying hundreds of hours in his family's single-prop Cessna out of Meigs Field, the smaller airport in Chicago. He was actually a legit pilot. This kid flew planes. And like most pilots, aerial bravado made Fran a reckless maniac driving a car. Just like Tom Wolfe's The Right Stuff, relating how the fighter pilots went nuts behind the wheel of their convertibles. And with Fran, it was 10 times worse when he was zonked on acid. He compulsively weaved in and out of traffic, haphazardly shifted lanes, freaking everyone out. He braked by downshifting, G-forces pressing me into the convertible top. I was scrunched in back. blending my now tripping body down into the street through the molten center of the earth. Upside down and inside out, dusk morphed to darkness, and before I knew it or remembered where we'd just been, we were ricocheting across Lakeshore Drive, whimsically known by Chicagoans as, of course, the acronym LSD. The highway runs flush with Lake Michigan up the north side, sporting a panoramic view of the city to the west and the beaches of Lake Michigan to the east. All of it now streaked with blazing light trails. We were tripping the light fantastic, and it was fantastic. So much fun. And there I was with minimum headroom. In the front seats, Fran and Ed were talking, but I couldn't understand a word of what they were saying, as if they were simultaneously far away and too faint to hear, yet so close to my face as to be shouting in my ear. The car lunged to the right, switched lanes, and hurled back to the left. "Holy shit, did you see that?" Fran shouted, gesturing across the windshield. "No," Ed and I said. "Good thing I'm driving," Fran sighed as he hurled the car back into the other lane. Fran's brains were annihilated, yet he inexplicably didn't get us killed and somehow knew exactly where we were going. On the way to wherever, we stopped at a convenience store, blistering neon lights flickering like bright strobes. I picked up a candy bar, which melted like a dolly clock onto the vibrating linoleum floor. Chocolate oozed infinitely in every direction. I asked the clerk, "How much?" He stared at me. Time froze. I left my body and saw myself stared at by a clerk in a chocolate-covered store. The store was in a city. The city was near a lake on the surface of a planet. The planet was spinning, vortex spiraling around its host star. The star was cruising through a galaxy, the galaxy spinning within a cluster. The cluster was lurking inside a universe, and the universe was suspended inside of. Dude! My name echoed through eons across billions of light years. I blinked and was relieved that the endless chocolate was mopped up, and the clerk was no longer staring at me. "Stop spacing out, man," said Fran. "We gotta go." Visibly older, he bought another sixer of Mickey's, a Bic lighter, zigzag rolling papers, and a pack of Parliament 100s with those little recessed filters. "I love these cigs," Fran observed, "especially when doing acid." He backed the car out without looking behind him and barreled headlong into speeding traffic. "Try one." He was right. They were lighter than Ed's harsh hand-rolled drums, and my serotonin-agonized mind couldn't stop chain-smoking them while twirling my index finger deep inside their hollow filters, putting Freud to shame. As I was tripping, I could feel every nuance of the paper. I thought about how they might have been manufactured. I thought about the smoke careening through the volume in that cylinder. I wondered about the equation to describe that cylinder. I thought about integration and calculus. I wondered what the leaves of the tobacco contained that gave me such a wonderful rush in conjunction with the LSD coursing through my brains. I coughed. I was self-conscious about coughing. I exhaled smoke. I watched the smoke in wafts drift alongside my head, and then several more beers, smokes, and a joint or two later, the parking lot of the Eden's Theater in Northbrook rushed at us. The car was, of course, stationary the whole time, and the world around us was moving. And miraculously enough, Fran had somehow navigated the entire universe to basically reposition us to our chosen destination. It was absolutely amazing. We tumbled out and gazed up at the beckoning marquee, Apocalypse Now, in all caps. Notorious for its widescreen surround sound Dolby experience, the auditorium was dark and cavernous, the seats were plush and comfortable, and our acid trips were just about to peak. The late 70s ushered in the dawn of on demand entertainment with home video and cable television, Betamax and VHS systems duking it out, MTV still a few years away. My jaw had literally dropped seeing my very first VCR and how you slid a cartridge inside and could watch a film of your choosing at your own home at any time. Up to then, all channels were broadcast, zero computers or internet or smartphones. It's hard for the digitally native generations, obviously, to understand and appreciate this antiquated technology. And most significantly, the user experience being limited to complete passivity. There were only three stations on the TV, and the only control I had was to switch from one station to the next. The signals were going out, and you could choose CBS, NBC, ABC, or the local Chicago WGN TV. The Latin or Spanish channel was 26, and Channel 11 was the public television with my favorite science show, Nova, going all the way back. The TV guide would arrive in printed form once a week, and it would show all the programming for the week across all these channels in your location. And that was all we had. That was multi-channel entertainment, single channel, 3 or 4 channel. Turn the dial. Physical theaters were the apex of media entertainment at the time. The Hollywood blockbuster era officially ignited by George Lucas and his game-changing Star Wars, 1977, only a couple years before these exciting events. Before Star Wars, nobody imagined the same movie playing for months in the theater, let alone generating hundreds of millions in revenue, lines going around the block. Prior, you saw film and forgot it. After, movies aimed to be a life-altering experience, including the one we were about to see. I saw the pre-CGI sci-fi classic Star Wars 20 times. Popped my Jedi cherry in that same Eden's Theater, packed to capacity for a Memorial Day matinee. Images of laser blasting stormtroopers and dog-fighting starships were seared into my mind's eye for months after that, and it set the bar. None of us would ever be the same after that, forever yearning for a life lived a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's hard to describe Star Wars when it came out. I remember my father reading the Chicago Sun-Times in his big Archie Bunker chair, and I remember seeing the first advertisement for Star Wars in a print newspaper, black and white. It had the iconic logo. It had Darth Vader's Hitler helmet with the armor. It had the princess with the funny-looking hair. It had the dashing knight or prince or something, and the flaming swords. And I had a feeling that this would be cool. I even asked my father if we'd go see it, and he grunted. And it really was the life-changing moment, like a heroin needle in the vein of my imagination, changing my perception of things and changing the whole industry. 3 banal earthly teen years later, I again sat in that sepulchral theater. One of my favorite words, sepulchral. That's exactly what it was like. It was part circus, part tomb. Competing with the hit of his protege, Francis Ford Coppola mortgaged his house and swapped plastic X-Wing fighters with real helicopters just to outdo George, his disciple in film, for his own Heart of Darkness meets Vietnam War epic, larger than life like its director. The movie erupted onto the effervescing screen and short-circuited my brain and my body like nothing else before it. Don't look at the camera. And I only followed the advice of Coppola himself in that cameo role. Shunning popcorn for poppers, amyl nitrate, that was Fran's trippy fetish. In retrospect, making me wonder if Fran were gay. I never thought of it at the time. It never even entered my head, let alone any other body part. Who did poppers back then? Who's done them since? I don't know. Fran shoved the brown bottle of amyl nitrate beneath my nostrils. I reflexively sniffed and felt the rush as a naked commando punched and shattered a mirror. His hotel ceiling fan spinning into churning chopper blade rotors, bombs thudded and jungles burned, hauntingly serenaded by Aldous Huxley-inspired Jim Morrison and his band Doors. Wow, wow, wow. That's when magic really hit the silver screen and was like a silver bullet right between my eyes. The LSD had dilated my pupils, jacked my blood pressure, elevated my body temperature, made my mouth dry, and induced muscle spasms. I was hyperventilating and sweating buckets in those big bucket seats in the Eden Theater. The vivid scenes of death and destruction exacerbated all these symptoms, made me want to crawl out of my skin, then leap right back inside to escape the on-screen pandemonium. The senselessness of the war and the pointlessness of the suffering shook me to the core. The drugs had activated my sentimental side. Throughout childhood, my father chastised me for being weak, chronically disappointing his Holocaust-surviving Eastern European machismo. Here was proof positive, his first and only American son tripping balls and yet tearful over the dying and the dead. The relentlessness of the patrol boat's journey down the river was a testament to the director's genius and the primal source of my asphyxiating terror. The drugs had dissolved the proscenium arch between perception and reality, empowering the filmmaker's implicit strategy of doing exactly the same thing on screen and off. I became Martin Sheen. We both hunted Marlon Brando along that river. Wow, wow, wow. Gasping for air, gripping the armrest, sinking helplessly into the plush theater chair, I furtively glanced at Fran and Ed, who were equally blown away, but exuding divergent emotions. Ed was an archetypal aesthetic who luxuriated in the sheer gestalt of a holistic cinematic experience. He was always a little bit effete. Back to the amyl nitrate, back to the poppers. In retrospect, I was missing something with this friendly dynamic here, I think. Fran was a sadistic libertine in contrast, who drooled at the sight of machine-gunned women and children. My deep existential suffering crescendoed into a self-referential frenzy at the bridge crossing scene. Distorted Jimi Hendrix licks reverberated through the point of view of hallucinating soldiers and across the screams, explosions, and pornographic whispers Flares left wide arc trails as Captain Willard asked who the commanding officer was, only to get a frantic answer, "Ain't you?" Fran, Ed, and I were obsessed by control back then because we didn't have any at all. As teen burnouts, we never felt comfortable at home and school among most of our peers. We couldn't find solace among each other either, so numbed ourselves into oblivion with a steady barrage of intoxicants. Stoned to the bone, we occasionally fooled ourselves into thinking we actually had our shit together. Ed's grandparents had emigrated from Germany after World War I. Opening a bar in Appleton, Wisconsin, they grilled bratwurst, brewed craft beer, and player pianoed Oktoberfest songs. Prohibition Houdini'd them out of business, so they moved back to Frankfurt, Germany. The goose stepping began about the time of the repeal, so they packed it up yet again, returned to the States, started all over. I remember being in Wisconsin on some weekend adventure that Ed's parents had invited me along to join. There was water skiing and bratwurst eating, and grandma was there, the old grandma. And she remembered, she told me some of these stories, how they were in their basement with the kind of garden window facing the street. And she remembers sitting there eating dinner, and then the line of feet, the goose stepping feet, at ground level there, right outside their window, and then the family looking at each other and saying, "Up, time to go back to America." I was always impressed by that story. I was really impressed by his grandmother, especially since the story so strongly contrasted with the fate of my own family in Hungary, who stayed in Budapest or on the receiving end of the genocide. Ed's folks were the type of Germans Kurt Vonnegut often wrote about, kind people swept up in the evil bullshit of history. They were also resourceful, flexible, and way ahead of the game. Ed inherited their boundless creativity and learned from their indefatigable spirit. I remember when I first met him, slumped in a chair and deeply immersed in the Sirens of Titan, that Vonnegut book. My least favorite, actually, but the one he loved the most, his hair plummeting onto the dog-eared pages. He was brimming with unrealized potential, as was I. Fran acted as our foil, outrageously brash and desensitized, gaslighting our shared immaturity. We were really a great triad, Fran and Ed and me, an odd dynamic of dysfunction. And boy, could we nonetheless party. We were the Stoned Roses. "What do you think?" Fran asked as he leaped up after what must have been his 10th viewing of Apocalypse Now. Yeah, he had seen it. He knew what we were in for. He was excited to put me and Ed through the ringer. He was a champ, and he loved every bloody second of it. He was as triumphant as Robert Duvall on the Napalm Beach. "Wasn't that awesome?" The usually demure house lights came on and seemed blindingly bright when they did so. Ed had a look of shock and awe on his face, and I was drenched in sweat, had trouble breathing. Fran gestured, "Let's rock." Stumbling over ourselves, scenes of the cow sacrifice looping inside my head, soundtracked by Robbie Krieger's guitar licks, echoing Colonel Kurt's dreadful, the horror, reverberating between my ears. Fran was elated. Ed was silent, and I couldn't shut the hell up. Again, all of us in character throughout, despite, in spite, and probably to spite each other, fueled by all the chemicals, the LSD, the marijuana, the malt liquor. Whee! I heard the sound of my own voice from far away, as if spoken by someone else, saying things that I wanted to say before I wanted to say them, then regretting that I had said them, and then saying them all over again. After what seemed like hours of monologuing about the literature of Joseph Conrad, the politics of Hubert Humphrey, and the archetypes of Carl Jung, they finally shut me down by shoving fresh joints, more beers, and cigarettes into my face. The parking lot expanded in every direction from Fran's roadster as my body autonomously morphed back into the tiny crevice behind their sweaty seats. Fran slammed the car into gear before I realized he'd rolled the convertible top down. Wind blew refreshingly into our faces, and I clutched the headrest for dear life. Fran pretending he was a chopper pilot swooping on burning villages in Nam. Unseasonably warm for fall in Chicago, dropping only a few degrees since the afternoon. The air exploded into a dizzying frenzy of light and fire. We were ripping down those streets. Hell's bells. We tore across town and back onto Lakeshore Drive, LSD, comfortably familiar, even if still madly distorted and volatile. Next stop, the Cavalry Cemetery in Evanston. Flush with the Lake Michigan, and opposite Sheridan Road at the tip of LSD, the winding highway running flush with the lake, flush with the cemetery on the opposite side of the freeway. The spooky place was one of our go-to haunts. We'd often get wasted in the graveyard first, then dash over to the beach, usually patrolled by the cops. Fran parked in a side street, and we skunked to our preferred entry point where low-hanging bushes covered the wrought iron fence. More burnout than Jock, we nonetheless knew how to climb, or at least lunge over the top without skewering ourselves on the pointy posts of those old Chicago fences. Once inside, we had the resting place of more than 100,000 Catholic souls, all to ourselves. Prowling around the shadowy vaults, monuments, and mausoleums was always enticingly macabre. This evening's heavy drugs layering fresh dimensions of fright night creepiness onto our misadventure. Spirits whispered from the darkness, leapt in front of our faces, vanished into wisps of weed and smoke. We wandered aimlessly, got lost, stumbled upon our favorite shrine. The grave of Patrick Murphy, who died on July 18th, 1876, beckoned. His monument was adorned with a statue of robed and rosaried Jesus, IHS and sunflower engraved cross to his side, arm above his head, finger raised to heaven, suggesting the vector of the deceased ascent in the afterlife. Fran saluted, then yelled, "Boo!" to initiate three-way rock, paper, scissors. Ed lost. Ed chugged a bottle of Mickey's, tucked the empty into his army jacket, and began to climb the monument. He slipped at the pedestal base, fell back, and we caught him. 1, 2, 3, up we pushed, enough for Ed to wrap his arms around Jesus' legs and shimmy up the stone body until he got face to face with our Savior, hugging him for support. Kissy kiss, Fran taunted. Resolute, Ed reached into his jacket and removed the bottle. Leaning heavily on one foot and holding the statue steadfast with his other arm, He stretched far as he could and delicately balanced the green grenade-shaped glass upside down and opening first onto the tip of Jesus' extended finger. Ghosts howled as Ed carefully edged his way back down. We high-fived our bro victorious. I remember looking up, the clouds in the background, the darkness, the whoosh of the traffic, the breezy cold, seeing Jesus, arm extended, finger up to the sky, the glistening Mickey's malt liquor jar on the tip, like a little thimble or prophylactic. Mission accomplished. It was all about turf and surf for Ed, Fran, and me. Our celebration was instantly cut short by raging paranoia. Up until that moment, we skulked invisibly among the dead, minding our own disrespectful business. But having pranked the Son of God, we suddenly felt exposed and hallucinated sinistral silhouettes eyeing us suspiciously from the dimly lit shadows of somber brownstones overlooking the graveyard's perimeter. To the beach, my dudes, commanded Fran, whose cowardliness was in direct proportion to his impulsiveness, sprinting back to the fence before Ed could brush himself off. Climbing, leaping over the sharp iron stakes, we ran after Fran into rushing traffic on Sheridan Road, the perversely skewed perspective making it impossible to accurately judge our distance from the speeding cars. We were like Frogger, lunging across, tripping deers and headlight trails. We froggered our way across the busy highway, dodging autos and miraculously staying alive. Honking horns, Dopplering into screaming high pitches that echoed across the sand as we ran with abandon onto the beach. We were alive. We made it. Somehow the cars had skirted us. We had skirted the cars. We were meant to survive. We had done it. We flung off our shoes and socks, the dunes undulating beneath our feet as we splashed into the freezing lake water. The jarring shock to my exposed flesh shot up my legs, titillated my dick and balls, shuddered throughout my chest cavity, and then exploded inside my head. The electrifying clarity was breathtaking, a liberation felt by Fran and Ed, too, who with zero hesitation threw off all their clothes and shamelessly ran buck naked into the frothing, freezing waves, diving beneath the moonlit water's surface. Time to choose. First willful act of the night for me. Join my compadres within the cold and wet, deep and dark, or stay dry on the beach, out of sight and out of mind. On cue with my uncertainty and indecision, time sped up, slowed down, sped back up, the shouts of Fran and Ed proportionately rising and falling in frequency and volume, Mickey Mouse whining to Goofy's guffaws. Spits! Fran called out into the white noise of the waves crashing on the shore, the streaming traffic up the highway, the wind reverberating between the cityscape buildings. My elementary school classmates used to jeer at my name and spit at me when I was only a few years younger, until Olympian Mark Spitz won his record 7 gold medals, the quantum leap from zero to hero, throwing me for a loop at the time. One day, I was the object of everyone's scorn as Michael Spitz, big wads headed my way, and the next day, gold medals won not by me, but someone else happened to have my same name. He was Hungarian. I was Hungarian. He was Jewish. I was Jewish. Maybe we were related, but at the time, Didn't make any sense to me, and I didn't win those medals, but I was treated like I did just because I had his name. So confusing. Ever since then, I became a last name kind of guy, though. The single syllable abruptness and sharp at the end, phonetically fitting my wiry frame and impulsive ADHD personality. Tonight's clarion call through acid enhanced filters summoned me into the frigid waters like a snake charmer's hypnotic melody. When without a second thought, I too got naked and dashed in. It happened just like that. There was no thinking. There was no decision making. There was only spits is the shits. Fran laughed in between fountains of filthy lake water blown from his mouth. I shuddered and swam toward the grinning head and spinning cylinder of water above, rotating in the air and somehow turning into a tiny tornado. Where was I? Where was Ed? As if summoned by my mind, he dolphin bobbed into view and dived back into the murky deep. The ice-cold lake was numbing, cleansing, and purifying. I sensed true buoyancy, a zero-G womb-like environment that dissolved the boundaries between mind, body, and world. Suspended within 1.3 quadrillion gallons of fresh water, taking on the maternal responsibilities of surrounding, protecting, and calming me. I was a postmodern punk immersed within a prenatal reality. I was immersed. I was surrounded. Mommy. The euphoria lasted for about 3 trimesters until a sharp object below tore into my foot. The searing pain shot up my leg, through my spine, and roared into my brain, birthing an out-of-body experience. I floated 100 feet above, saw myself swimming with Fran and Ed below, then flew to the beach where I was already sitting, watching myself fly back into my body. It was a starry fright indeed. I re-entered my body and found myself fully clothed again except for my shoes and socks, assuringly placed right next to me. How thoughtful! Ed and Fran were still lolling in the lake, their shouts of joy indistinguishable from cries of terror. If they drowned, I would have to retrieve their bodies, perform last rites, and bury them here on the beach. I dug my hands into the cool, damp sand, feeling every grain, every single grain, thousands of them. So groovy. My punctured foot throbbed, my heart pounded, blood circulated, a salty metallic liquid flow that reminded me of the big dark lake and my friends who might still be alive somewhere in there. Living or dead, they lurked below a mirrored surface that stretched infinitely into a hazy horizon that never met the dome of a cloud-shrouded sky. Time accelerated again, clouds circulating in frenzied motion. Years later, I would view Van Gogh's paintings in their three-dimensional glory at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Studying them in books does their astonishing layered topography no justice. Thick paint rising above the canvas in tortured peaks and valleys, each masterpiece an entire universe unto itself. Was the savant on drugs? Where does madness end and art begin? Behind me, the cars racing up and down the northern tip of LSD were fast, a speed racer at Mach 5, leaving long overlapping trails, reminding me of the machine gun tracers in the horrific film we'd just seen on the big screen. The time dilation had an even more dramatic effect on the swirling clouds above, chaotically morphing into bizarre shapes embossed across the shimmering sky's vault. A fluffy cloud stopped, spiraled clockwise, transformed into the split face of an old bearded man who started talking to me. Not new to hallucinogens, having already experienced some weird shit, this one hands down took the prize. The vision was so jarring in that moment that I had to recruit my third eye, the self watching my hallucinating self hallucinate, just to get a grip and hang on. That third eye was always my friend. That's what kept me and anyone else in these experiences from completely losing it. There was you doing the drug and your body experiencing the drug. But there's always that self outside of self, that uber self, that super self looking in, seeing yourself wasted, knowing that you were messed up, knowing that you were experiencing things you normally didn't experience, and understanding it as such, is able to control it, or at least stand beside it. Watch it happen, let it happen, not resist it, knowing full well that it was temporary, knowing full well that this kind of madness would pass, and letting it all go. Was I actually seeing and hearing this? I was. Cloud Angel's voice was alien sounding yet hauntingly familiar, his words unintelligible yet emotionally soothing. I couldn't discern his accent or meaning. Was his timbre tenor or baritone? Was his language ancient or modern? I blanched again, double and triple checked. This was really happening to me. It was. He kept talking. I remember this like yesterday, like 5 minutes ago, and the feeling that I was actually a part of this. You always hear about stunning hallucinations. Whenever you do hallucinogens, you want something fantastic like this fantastic experience to happen to you. And then when it does, when the circumstances are just right, it's so unbelievable that you doubt yourself. That third eye kicks in, but not in a defensive capacity, but in a way of disbelief. Is this actually happening? Am I actually seeing this stuff? Wow. Dreams are bizarre enough. Having them while awake, all the stranger. Where do dreams come from anyway? Which part of us is dreaming? Which part experiencing that dream? What's the boundary between dreamer, dream, and dream observer? Now I grappled with another view, my fully conscious self observing the observer of the woke dreamer dreaming dreams while awake. And then on top of that, the awoken wokester looking in on this. And just like you extend numbers to infinity and beyond infinity with these iterative steps, more and more and more and more, the omega on the omega, never ending until the big omega. I wasn't quite there yet. I was terrified, wondering what would happen if I made it. The LSD had annihilated one sacrosanct sensory, cognitive, and emotional divides. I appreciated the meridian lines surrounding me, the singularities between fright and flight, audience and art form, life and death, water and sky, lake and sand, dream and dreamer. The dangers here were becoming painfully manifest, the reason many people lose their mind while on drugs. Wow. I held on, though. The face kept speaking, faster now. Mouth moved, eyebrows furrowed, indecipherable words echoed across the entire sky. I felt profound mystery, egregious agony, and boundless ecstasy, not wanting the show to ever stop, until long shadows appeared on all sides. I swung around. Streetlights along the highway cast swaying silhouettes of my own seated body. When I gazed back up, the clouds had dissipated, and the ancient face had vanished, the scintillating sky silent except for the howling wind. Lonely, I learned to join Fran and Ed again within the cold, dark, murky lake. Dying together, we'd eternally lurk below, occasionally haunt the shores, taunt future generations of tripping teen burnouts with our ghoulish prankster hijinks. Next thing I remember, we're back in Fran's Roadster, damp but refreshed, smoking another joint and finishing the last of the Mickey's malt liquor. The intense hallucinations had tapered off, our minds lubricated with booze and tweaked with weed. But reality still hadn't fully recalibrated as we pulled up to a traffic light near Ed's house. We gawked at the signals, trying to figure them out. Is the light red, yellow, or green? Fran nonchalantly asked, squinting through the dirty windshield. They all look purple to me, Ed said, riding shotgun. Spitz, you're the misunderstood genius. What do you think? Folded like a 6-foot human accordion in the back crevice again, I had to crook my neck to get a viewable angle. The bright purple light is at the bottom, so it must be green. Advance to go, screamed Fran, pedal to the metal, shifting into third. MG Midget's engine roaring and tires squealing. Collect $200. The burst of acceleration thrust me back against the folded convertible top, which I now noticed was open again. The momentum nearly hurling me out the back as I desperately clutched their headrest and assumed the fetal position, bucking bronco, after seeing some face of an old man in the fucking sky talking to me. Fran's 8-track player blasted Black Sabbath, his musical tastes more conventional than Ed's nuanced post-punk picks. Hanging on for dear life, at that moment I appreciated the band's head-nodding groove and Ozzy's hypnotic vocals of Paranoid. All day long I think of things, but nothing seems to satisfy. Think I'll lose my mind if I don't find something to pacify. We pulled into the driveway of Ed's house and made a concerted effort to chill, knowing his parents were likely still up. The real world was continuing this whole time. People were watching TV. They were like cleaning up after dinner. We were tripping balls, witnessing entire villages of Vietnamese civilians being massacred. We were swimming in the lake naked, the lake consuming us, spitting us back out. We were weaving and winding through traffic, not knowing what the hell we were doing or who the hell we even were. And suburban America just relentlessly kept going, did not care. As weird, if not weirder than we were, at least we thought so, probably because we were so damn weird. Although we'd been acting like shameless fools in public for the past 5 or 6 hours, we now felt acutely accountable. Like, oh, like the spell was broken. I even checked my watch. For the first time that night, I think. Phosphorescent big arm at 2 and small arm at 10. The night's still young, the parting to continue if we just kept our cool. Shh. Ed's basement bedroom was our stoner HQ. Down a long flight of steps and opposite the laundry room. Bespoke and quirky, just like Ed. To the right of the door was a tall draftsman's desk covered in art supplies and illuminated by a standing jeweler's lamp. His unmade twin-size futon ran flush with the far wall, opposite which a vintage sound system and speakers stood like a shrine. The perfect stoner's basement bedroom hangout. We piled in, closed the door, and assumed our ground state. Ed at the stereo cranking early Cure and King Crimson. We always had the coolest music. Ed was the ultimate DJ. We knew the coolest bands. We were the fans of the coolest bands before the bands were even cool. Fran in the far corner smirking smugly, smoking parliaments, ashing into a potted weed plant. And your humble narrator here, sitting on a broken wicker chair, babbling nonstop about the glacial origins of Lake Michigan and the personas of Kabbalistic spirits. The talking head in the sky looked just like the archangel of the 10th Sephiroth, Megatron, I explained to the boys. Half his face is covered in blinding white light, the other half obscured by the infinite negative light of Yahweh, whose omniscience and omnipresence precludes mere mortals from ever comprehending him. All that data and power imploding like a black hole. Drink this, Fran insisted. It's called Shut the Fuck Up Juice. You'll love it. While yabbering, I hadn't noticed both guys had left the room, raided the refrigerator, and bought back a 12-pack of Becks. We were at that late phase in acid trips when the brain, overwhelmed by sensory overload over the past few hours, is exhausted, yet serotonin receptors remain agonized, resulting in raw, crackling nerves. Beer, lots of it, lubricated the crash. Dehydration from the incessant sweating made us insatiably thirsty, too. We pounded them down one after another. I was first too busy drinking to talk, then too drunk to be talking again. Fran's mission accomplished. 6 beers in, I had to take a leak, left for the bathroom, and staggered back up the rickety steps to find myself face to face with Ed's father. A meet the parent moment. About the same age then as I am now, similar to his son, he was stocky and dark-haired, friendly but taciturn. We'd never exchanged more than a passing hello, but he made his commanding presence felt via his glorious Oktoberfest beer house piano playing, which thundered throughout the expansive suburban house on Sunday afternoons. His favorite was the Esseliad, the donkey song. Now in front of him stood a drunk jackass, slack-jawed and still tripping his brains out. He knows that I know that he knows that I'm on drugs, I thought, a sentiment Ed's father acknowledged through a quizzical Mr. Spock-like single eyebrow raise at the sight of me. I suddenly remembered their terrific family stories and felt I had so much I wanted to ask this guy, so much I wanted to tell him. The only son of Hungarian Jews that was raised Reform, religion a distant second to the cultural and historical identity program that my father insisted I get. Forced by him to attend grueling years of Hebrew school that led up to my bar mitzvah at age 13, I was taught pointless rituals, mythologized history, and how everyone hated the Jews, especially the Nazis who killed millions of us. Somewhere along the way, the statements, all Nazis are German and all Germans are Nazis, became a tautology, the ground zero of Jewish paranoia targeted at the heart of the Aryan soul. Thankfully, a product feature of my misfit, burnout, slacker teen status was the skeptical rejection of tribal groupthink, which burned away the cynical racism and xenophobia that I was taught. Hebrew school was an indoctrination, just like any, if not most, if not all religious schools. I hated every second of it, and I knew even then that it was a load of bullshit. But I went with it anyway. I might have learned a thing or two about the tradition. I learned how to at least write and read Hebrew phonetically without knowing a word of what was being written or read. That was part of my identity, and part of my goal in these teen years was just to break free of it all, especially that. I therefore had no problem with Ed as my best friend and actually embraced it with all the more zeal, knowing he was exactly the kind of kid bitter rabbis and my own jaded father dismissed as a prima facie genocidal maniac. Extrapolate this contrarian sentiment tenfold to Ed's dad, whose family twice emigrated from the fatherland after witnessing their first Zig Heil as his grandmother story told us up in Wisconsin with all the other Germans. the family nice enough to invite this spoiled Jewish kid to join them, and then only to trip balls with their son years later in high school, full circle. All this rushed through my addled mind at once, but all that erupted from my drunken motor mouth was the slurred, "Are you going to play the piano?" Piano? I was slipping, grabbing the flimsy wooden banister, suddenly tumbling, the world spinning. No, 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 no. Boom, thud, boom, thud. I blacked out, came to, gazed up the wrecked step into the eyes of Ed's father. Either a product of shame, brain damage, or a combination of both. I remember nothing after that until Ed, Fran, and I were outside on the lawn, headed back to the car. Someone's leg crossed mine, and I defensively kicked back, a fist striking my solar plexus, all three of us going down onto the mildewy grass. I could hardly see, but thanks to the close quarters, didn't need to. What probably looked like a ridiculous WWF match choreographed by Jerry Lewis or Quentin Tarantino. Three completely wasted teenagers went mano a mano, two against one, the one hopelessly uncoordinated and nearsighted, yet on the defensive and determined. Fran was the first to pull away and quit. He rolled off the lawn, his head nodding, and lit cigarette were tokens of his surrender. Ed and I continued unabated, circling around each other, grappling, tackling, wrestling, punching, and kicking. Feeling no pain, we were numbed by the steady input of alcohol, nicotine, marijuana, and acid. He was lividly pissed off by my performance with his dad, the beer no doubt triggering ample aggression to fill the encroaching void left by my dissipating hallucinogens. But something else seemed to be going on as we tumbled across the yard. Back in the early 70s, only sissies and drag queens were gay. People said faggot constantly, and homosexuality was a sociopathic personality disturbance in the DSM too. By the end of the decade, progress was being made, but suburban teens like us had no frame of reference, had no idea what any of that meant. That was all a mystery to me. Now looking back too, Fran with the poppers in a movie? The three of us going mano a mano. Why? Because I had tumbled down the steps, got everyone thrown out of the house. Well, that was room to get my ass kicked, but there was something else that was going on. There was an undercurrent to this dynamic, and I just didn't get it. It wasn't even part of my frame of reference. Fran reluctantly drove me home after Ed and I brushed ourselves off, fist pump, made some peace. That wouldn't be the last time we tried to drunkenly kick each other's asses, the brash physicality never consummating into anything sexual ever between us. But the weirdness paradoxically gave it ever the more gravitas, similar to the illegality of the drugs we enjoyed so much. There was something illicit that was being felt, but unlike the drugs, we never indulged it. Never even crossed my mind. Might have been different. Might have been different for Ed. Might have been way different for Fran. I finally rode shotgun in the MG Roadster on that way home. The seat too small and legroom too short, but a marked improvement from lying across the back the entire night. Whether because the drugs were thinning or Ed was gone or both, Fran seemed like a different person. He drove calmly and carefully, spoke slowly and coherently, asked me questions and responded thoughtfully. I was bored and missed the old Fran. We pulled up to my house sometime past 1 a.m. Tomorrow a school day. Today a school day. An hour or so, a few hours away a school day. I'd have to sneak inside and upstairs without waking my parents. I thanked Fran for the alcohol, drugs, and cigarettes and asked if I still owed him any money. "Give me another 20, he said. As the car left, he stuck his head out the window. Nice Nipponese plants, young son, and vanished into the night. I stumbled past my father's bonsai garden on the front lawn as if seeing them for the first time. My father snugly fit the stereotype of people who hated other people, yet had a green thumb and loved animals. Speaking of which, as I opened the front door, I was greeted by our bulldog, a Boston Terrier named Max, who somehow sensed whenever I was on drugs. He sighed and went back to sleep. Trying to avoid making noises, I of course made even more loud footsteps, dropping things, doors slamming. But my parents slept through it all soundly. The year before, I had been a manic, depressive freshman, hell of a mess of chronic insomnia and suicide attempts. They snoozed right through them all, too. Finally, in bed tonight, I was still totally jacked, utterly exhausted, but still hours from falling asleep. I grabbed my favorite standby, Mattel's classic electronic football handheld game. It was state of the art for the late 70s, a harbinger of digital gaming now ubiquitous on smartphones that pack a billion times the computing power. But then I would spend hours staring at the LED blips. Even when I was sober, still high, the thrills and spills were magnified as I held the screen flush with my eyeballs. I don't know if you remember this game. I found one on eBay when I was thinking about this evening a few years ago, and I bought it, and I held it in my hand, and it was plastic clunk of junk, especially in comparison to the technology today. It's kind of like comparing today's smartphone with a tricorder from Star Trek. But at the time, it was something else. Football players were represented literally as tiny red dots on the screen, pixel points you tapped, up, down, forward, back buttons to dodge defenders and run gaps between the little lights. It was a primal combo of Space Invaders and Defender, if you remember those video games, with a Vegas slot machine whirling and twirling sound effect that went along for the ride. Fourth down option, play or kick, you were always on the offense. The stakes as high as the batteries lasted. Breathtaking action for 1975, face in the screen and drugs still in my head, created an ersatz VR experience. Each pixel a gigantic fuzzy red sphere in jagged motion through a two-dimensional finite plane as I held the thing right in my face. Big, huge spherical blurs. The football running back obeyed every finger-pressed command, my field of vision completely consumed by the self-contained universe of those blurry blobs and blurping beeps. So much fun. Knock, knock. Did I just hear that at my bedroom door, my closed bedroom door? So much of this evening's stimuli came from inside my head. Perception shifting into reality and reality messing around with perception that I at first couldn't tell. Knock, knock. Did the sounds come from within or without? Close by or far away? Before I could decide, the door slowly slid open and I saw my mother's face peer inside. She still suffered from chronic postpartum depression triggered by my birth 15 years before, exacerbated by a second emigration and reinforced by marrying an asshole, namely my dad. Throughout my childhood, she smothered me with terror and love, deeply blending flight with vulnerability. My teen years had already made their expression manifest. To compensate, I became a stubbornly defiant outcast. Anything, anything but what I experienced at home. My childhood and my adolescence became a long night's journey into day. Tonight felt different, though. Maybe she sensed euphoria, my cathartic release from objective reality, and that actually calmed her. Or maybe today's madness influenced how I perceived her, a projection of acid laced awareness onto her otherwise manic depressive soul. Regardless, she smiled and I smiled back, or I smiled and she smiled back. I can't be sure. But I remember we both smiled when we looked at each other. And that, believe it or not, was a first. Shouldn't you be sleeping? She asked in her native Hungarian, which I understood by this age was uncomfortable speaking. Shouldn't you be sleeping? She asked in her native Hungarian, which I understood by this age was uncomfortable for her to speak. Yes, I replied in English, looking up from the primitive video game and non-verbally suggesting I was fine and having fun. A premonition of what her grandkids would be doing all day and all night in a few digitally obsessed decades. Video games. This was the beginning of the beginning of the end. Perplexed but appeased, her face disappeared into the shadows, and the door creaked closed as awkwardly as it was opened. Our wretched household was a toxic bubble of silence or screamed, helpless apathy or savage hysteria, utterly devoid of conversation or connection. I never had the courage to break from these vile patterns, so treated my toxic parents as badly as they treated me. This evening's whirlwind adventure yanked me outside myself, offered a fresh frame of reference, made me even more introspective than usual. I was beginning to realize how I took everything for granted, the extent to which I relied on others to lift me out of my own despair. I always had smart-ass answers for everything, knew so much, yet actually did so little. So I leapt out of bed, threw the video game into the garbage, sat at my desk, grabbed the notebook and pen, and wrote a letter. I understood that the past influenced my future only if I allowed it, and that the present was ripe with extraordinary possibilities that demanded honesty and integrity. I vowed to invite family and friends into my transformation, starting, of course, with Fran and Ed's. No, thanks for paying attention if you made it this far, but no. I didn't do any of these things. Instead, I thought about my mom and her sadness for a few seconds, then thrust my face right back into the video game and plunged into its virtual world. The ridiculously simple rules and rigidly defined boundaries were cozy and reassuring. Hours flew by until the first light of dawn illuminated my room. I had just risked my life on Chicago's highways, witnessed the death of innocents, defiled sacred grounds, swam in an ancient lake, summoned an archangel, then been nice to my mom and committed a dozen felonies along the way. But for all the exhilarating mayhem and out of body and mind experiences, I had learned absolutely nothing that would actually change any of my behaviors. Meanwhile, a few miles away, another childhood friend embarked on a different kind of trip. An only child like me, Pete had his own challenges. His mom was an emotionally distant librarian type who asked what books you hadn't read. His dad was a gym coach and sportscaster who played drill sergeant at home, forcing Pete to become all the things he wasn't. He lived right behind us. We had a small little house at the corner of East Prairie Road and Church Street. We lived right at the boundary of dry Evanston and wet Skokie. So liquor stores ran all along that one side of the street. But in the house behind us was Pete. Pete and his mom and dad. And I don't remember the exact details, most of which were hearsay, but everyone knew Pete snapped finally back there in that house right behind us, and he hit the road in high school. Trekking cross country and gone for months, he parlayed his charisma and friendliness into survival skills, ultimately winding up at a distant relative's place in the Rockies. His parents finally tracked him down and had him delivered back. But nothing was ever the same. Pete's story stunned me at the time. Where did he get the courage to take action and actually run away from home? Then I recalled an afternoon we spent arguing whether the live or studio version of a Led Zeppelin song was better. Despite my detailed analysis, he was the one spinning the records, so he listened to his choice, not mine. That's where it comes from. Doing it. Shut up and make your move. Take ownership. Act. Now. Do it. I had no choice but to become a day tripper. Decades later, I caught up with Pete, who went on to become a courier for the Masters of the Universe at the Chicago Board of Trade. Eminently likable, Pete was taken under their wing, sent on airplanes delivering securities notes, and when on the ground taught how to day trade. That became his career, making him as fiercely independent in adulthood as he had been in adolescence. Back in my bedroom, the morning sun coaxed me into Monday. I switched off the video game and took an ice cold shower that partially revived me. I slugged espresso, skipped breakfast, and shambled into school with zero sleep and frayed nerves. Despite the fatigue, I looked forward to extending our stoner credo of maintaining our cool while wasted. This time post hoc, this time with a bad acid hangover. This time thinking about realizing that I had never gotten the courage to ever think about running away. Huh. Okay. The night before I stretched the boundaries of space and time, traveled billions of light years, and returned more or less intact. Now I sat in history class surrounded by well rested and fully engaged peers, and nobody noticed or cared. The good news was I could fly under the radar, be seen yet unseen, sail through the rest of the day without calling any attention to myself. Guess who digs Spitzy? Someone catcalled, awakening me from my falsely assuring revelry. Classmates pointed and grinned. Whispers and laughter from every angle hit me all at once, just like that cold Lake Michigan water from the night before. Just because I was paranoid didn't mean this wasn't actually happening to me. Reality confirmed and next steps urged by the varsity quarterback who leaned over and commanded, "Ask her out on a date, bro." Ask whom? Ask Lucy, of course, blushing as brightly as me. She was tall and attractive, demure and intelligent. Sure enough, there she sat just a few desks away, smiling at me. A win for any kid my age, let alone one so hopelessly lost in situations like this. Aghast, I fidgeted, grimaced, and shrugged, unable to look at her or look away from her, Mr. Loudmouth at a loss for words. Our history teacher mercifully called order and carried on. Today's topic, the fall of Rome. Does anyone remember the death of Julius Caesar? He asked, starting today's class where we'd left off. 44 BC, someone shouted, eliciting sarcastic applause. The Ides of March? I tried to rebound from my excruciating Lucy fumble by shifting into full smart-ass mode. March 15th! It worked, the entire class erupting with oohs and ahs, cheers and applause. My reputation as awkward but brilliant stoner was temporarily reinforced, but at the cost of turning off Lucy, who most likely liked me for me being just me, and at the story of me I created to shield myself from fears of her rejection. Yet again I felt smothered with terror and love, blending flight with vulnerability. I never dated Lucy, even though she offered herself on a silver platter, stamp of approval from the entire sophomore history class. The previous night, I could even have had sex with Ed, for fuck's sakes. The world a realm of infinite possibility. What was wrong with me? What was I afraid of? A bibliophile and voracious reader. I seemed to know everything that yet really, I didn't have a fucking clue. I never dated Lucy, even though she offered herself on a silver platter, stamp of approval from the entire sophomore history class. The previous night, I could have even had sex with Ed, for fuck's sake. The world a realm of infinite possibility. What was wrong with me? What was I afraid of? A bibliophile and voracious reader, I seemed to know everything that yet really didn't have a clue. Back in the late 70s, much of American society didn't either. The 21st century has since ushered in a reconsideration and a resurgence of hallucinogens. Serotonergic psychedelics from LSD to 2CB, psilocybin to mescaline, and DMT to MDMA, now used by the healthcare system to treat medical conditions ranging from PTSD to OCD, alcoholism to depression, headaches to marriage. Tripping with Fran and Ed was irresponsible and dangerous, but in retrospect was also brazen and precocious. Sure, we were misfits, burnouts, and slackers, yet we tapped into the chemical wisdom of the psychedelic blow your mind hippie generation prior to us, while actively anticipating the posh microdosing change your mind transformative generation ahead. It was all really about a hot flub time machine. Having gone back in time, knowing what I know now, I choose to tell my younger self nothing that has to do with advice, warnings, hopes, or dreams. I also disavow both of us from my feelings of pride, shame, excitement, or fear. Neither Pollyanna nor pessimist. I would prefer we simply connect. And he put down the electronic football game just long enough to pay close attention to what I want to tell him. Our brains seem to remember everything, yet we only recall certain things, usually for good reason. That makes recalling specific experiences from decades ago compelling, since we wonder why these memorable moments stand out and others become lost forever. Reminiscing doesn't change the past, but selective memory can influence and even enable future possibility. Feeling like you have nothing to lose turns loss into an advantage, at least until you realize adding on beats, taking things away. Shifting focus from destruction to creation and cynicism to opportunism is fraught for and won more with attitude than aptitude. Nobody cares about the risks you took, how insightful you are, how deep you're willing to go, or how hard you tried. At the core of teenage angst is disappointment with oneself and the world. Between self and universe is a gaping, seemingly infinite chasm brimming. Check, 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 check. Our brains seem to remember everything, yet we only recall certain things, usually for good reason. That makes recalling specific experiences from decades ago compelling, since we wonder why these memorable moments stand out and others become lost forever. Reminiscing doesn't change the past, but selective memory can influence and even enable future possibility. Feeling like you have nothing to lose turns loss into an advantage, at least until you realize that adding on beats takes things away. Shifting focus from destruction to creation and cynicism to opportunism is fought for and won more with attitude than aptitude. Nobody cares about the risks you took, how insightful you are, how deep you're willing to go, or how hard you tried. At the core of teenage angst is disappointment with oneself and the world. Between self and universe is a gaping, seemingly infinite chasm brimming with exhilaration, with potential, all flush with daunting danger. The dynamic tension between attraction and repulsion makes escapism in whatever form particularly enticing. Running both towards and away, all teens run. Whether psychedelics open the doors to perception or close the ones to responsibility remains to be seen. Looking back, my own indulgence did both, since I discovered so much about myself and the world, yet failed to fully absorb or practically apply any of those life lessons. Like most powerful tools in life, drugs shed light, but it's up to you to look, listen, learn, and share. On the plane, returning to his parents, after Pete ran away, was found, and sent back home again, he allegedly ingested half a sheet of blotter acid, arriving so wasted that he couldn't even speak. I remember his father describing what a mess he was, how thank goodness he'd fully recovered, the family together again, God bless. What struck me then, as it strikes me now, is how Pete decided to trip his brains out on his way back, not out. Fran, Ed, and I applied the opposite strategy to expected effect. Bored with ourselves and each other, intimidated by the world's potential and frightened of its danger, we drove intoxicated, watched horrific war movies, desecrated cemeteries, nearly drowned, and woke up our parents. But unlike Pete, we always played it safe, never made a real break, didn't ask Lucy out on a date. Same could be said for the philosopher hippies who inspired us, and the millennial Gen Nexters following in our psychedelic footsteps. Map versus territory, therapy versus real world battles, useful exuberance versus tarnished wisdom, drugs versus reality. Life offers no substitute for gritty determination, relentless focus, and hard work. We have no shortcuts on the way. At long last, I find Colonel Kurtz, lean close to my teen self, stare into his still dilated pupils, eyes bloodshot from hours of drug and video game abuse. I promise not to give advice, share dreams, or trigger any emotions. I lied, but hopefully for a good cause. The ends eventually justifying the means, akin to our years of juvenile delinquency. He's surprised I'm bald and stares right back at me. Here's all you need to know, I whisper. Our parents are crazy. Run away. Your math skills are better than you think. Pursue science. A good writer, keep typing. Become a science writer. Write science fiction. Become a science journalist. You can do it. That's it? My teen self smirks. Oh, I add, Susan Goodson, the cowgirl from Texas, your classmate, will ask you to prom next year, junior year. Accept her offer this time, dumbass. Don't turn her down. What would you tell your younger self? Would they listen? Thanks for listening. And I hope you enjoyed this extended solo vignette, if you will, of the No Hair, All Heart podcast.